Welcome to the Bible Feed podcast, a place for conversations about the Bible and faith in the modern world, where ordinary people come together to help each other understand the Bible better. Let's get started.
Welcome everyone to the Bible Feed podcast. I'm Dan Weatherall, and today we're going to start a series on something which is, well, something that I might approach with a bit of trepidation, maybe, and many people might. We're going to start thinking about the Book of Revelation, and I've got Paul Damport here, and he's going to help lead us through it. Aren't you, Paul?
I'm going to give it a jolly good go. Thanks, Dan. I think we're just about at our anniversary.
Yeah, that's right.
So it seems like a good time to start the new series.
Yeah, definitely. Do you know, it's something I think that in lots of Christian circles, and possibly even in circles that haven't really had much affiliation with sort of Christianity, but over the last few months, 12 months or so, aspects or things from the Book of Revelation have really been sort of brought to the fore. Maybe not necessarily for the best reasons, but maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself. We need to get to that. But you know, people are. I was looking around at Google searches that people do for Revelation and the Book of Revelation and contents within it and things like that. And you know, there's a lot of people out there searching for things like the Mark of the Beast or 666, or what do these things mean? Explaining those things. There's some really curious things in the book, aren't there? And lots of people scratching their heads and wanting to know what's going on. So I think
there's certainly some terms that have found their way into kind of regular usage and popular culture, like apocalypse and Armageddon and things like that. But it's interesting that Mark of the Beast, and that should be kind of top of the list. Maybe that's. I know there's some connection I think people making between that and vaccinations. So
microchips and buying and selling, and can't travel without it, and now the vaccine has come to the fore. So people have always been thinking about that and trying to sort of interpret that. That's just one little example, isn't it, of this book? It's very bizarre book. I think we need to get that out there right at the start.
Yeah, it's mysterious.
Yeah, mysterious. Yeah, and so people have been sort of curious to know, really, how do we decipher these sorts of things, the characters and the imagery and the things within the book, and that's what we want to try and do. I'm guessing in this first episode, Paul, you're not going to dive straight into tell us what the Mark of the Beast really is, but
we won't get there today.
No, building a bit of a framework, a foundation. Yeah, and
I think there is a bit of an appeal to that sort of mystery, and you use the word decipher. There's something appealing about looking at something and think I've got to find the code that unlocks the meaning of this, and it's full of symbols that once I've got the special key, the insight to unlock it, then I will be able to see something that very few other people can see, and that's a really appealing thing. To people. That kind of comes with there's a flip side to that, which is, if you've got a particular ideology, then you can probably come to the Book of Revelation and find whatever it is you want to kind of project onto it. So, it's that there are some difficulties with how it's approached.
Yeah. People love a good conspiracy theory, don't they? There's always something more going on that you can sort of call on, and something as mysterious and difficult to perhaps grasp as the Book of Revelation is, with all these strange beasts, plagues and strange things happening. It's very easy to sort of read things into it, I suppose, which we've got to try and not do as well, as much as possible. Yeah,
I think what we might end up with is doing the opposite of that, and actually making it much less mysterious.
Okay,
and actually not really treating it as a decoding exercise.
Okay,
we're not going to reveal some code or some secret key. There's not a sort of a eureka moment that we'll have. We will just look at what's there and what's always been there, and just see what emerges from looking at the text that's there. There's a phrase that keeps popping up in particularly the first few chapters of Revelation, when the letters to the 7 churches, for example, there's this phrase, "He that has an ear, let him hear." So that's what we're going to try and do. We'll just hear what it says, and then kind of be thoughtful about it and be responsible about what we hear.
Yeah, good. Okay. And most of us have ears, so we can hear. We've got the text. We can read it. We can try and hear it. So yeah, okay. So what does it mean then to treating it responsibly? Then what sort of way?
Yeah, and there's a real danger that this just sounds a bit glib, but what I think that means is reading it, hearing it. After all, when it was first communicated to people, it would have been read aloud to audiences, and they would have heard it. So what I think it means is hearing it with the rest of the Bible story in mind, and putting it in its place in that story.
Okay.
That kind of means we need to have a pretty good handle on what that story is, and we'll obviously draw elements of that out.
Well, you've got a whole year's set of podcasts to go back to listen to. I mean, not that we've covered everything, but at all. But there's a good lot of things that we touch on that try to build a picture of what that story is. Yeah. Yeah,
but the overarching story of humanity, its need for redemption, and Jesus Christ and his death and resurrection. So
okay.
I think it also means applying what I've basically just made up, what I would call the 3 T's, which is reading it, with the right, bearing in mind the type of writing that it is, the time that it's set in, and the target audience.
Okay.
Which is, I guess 3 T's is quite a good
so there's again
rule of thumb to apply. 3 T's. So the type of writing.
The
time it was written, so the sort of context in history that it's written, and the target audience. Who's it written to?
Good.
Who's hearing it?
I'll try and remember those for the next episode.
Yeah.
Okay. 3 T's.
And, yes, hold me to those.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Yeah, but we're going to, I think, probably do 6 podcast episodes on this. So let's be realistic. We're not going to cover all the details.
No.
But I would hope we'd get to the point where we've got a framework that people can understand and see the overall structure and leave you with that to think about and build on. I guess the other key thing I'd say is that in advance is I'm not going to be talking about lots of history.
Okay.
And you don't need to know lots of history in the first place, and you don't need to remember lots of history as we go through this.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a key thing to remember. There's at least one view. I think we're going to come on to think about this, aren't we? At least one view of how to read the book of Revelation that presumes that you ought to know a lot of history to try and sort of unravel it and understand it. So that's interesting. We'll come on to that in a second. Just before we do, one aim that I've got through this, and I'm going to try and do this as we go through, is to cut out jargon as much as possible, because it's very much a thing where we're sort of doing any kind of Bible study, Bible interpretation, talking about the Bible, Christianity, or anything like that. That we all love a bit of jargon, don't we? It builds up in communities of faith, and so probably particularly so when you're dealing with this sort of confusing and complicated book at the end of Scripture, whether or not it actually is that. It's kind of made to be that. And we'll try and work it out, won't we? But yeah, jargon. I'll be the jargon police.
Okay, and I will use jargon, and I'm sure you'll pull me up on that, and we'll try and explain it.
Excellent. Cool. Okay, right. So you said, you said that we don't need to know any history, but what? If we've already talked about the Bible story, where we are in the place of the Bible story, that's time, isn't it, as well? We need to think back to the particular point in time. So there's a little bit of history there, isn't there, I suppose? Yeah. So you're not thinking about lots of little details of extraneous bits of history, that's your point. But it is important with every part of Scripture to have a little bit of understanding of when it was written and what was going on at that particular point in time.
Yeah, so let's, and I think we can go into the opening paragraphs of the Book of Revelation, and just start with the opening and see what it is kind of telling us about the where we are in the Bible story, if you like. So it appears right at the end of the Bible, so it kind of suggests where we are.
It's at the end. Okay.
So
Good.
at the end of the beginning, or the beginning of the end, or something.
Shall I read?
Maybe the first 3 verses.
Okay, all right. So, Revelation chapter 1 and the first 3 verses. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his servants the things that must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John, who bore witness to the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ, even to all that he saw. Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written in it, for the time is near. Okay.
Okay. So immediately we've got a sort of a chain of communication from God to Jesus to an angel to John, and so it immediately suggests that Jesus is not present on earth. So after his resurrection and ascension is where it places it. It talks about John as bearing witness to the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ. And what is it? What is he bearing witness to? In other places, in the first letter of John, he talks about that which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, and which we have looked upon and touched with our hands, concerning the word of life, the life that was made manifest, and which was made manifest to us. So he's talking about him seeing the resurrected Jesus. So it's after the resurrection.
Okay.
And then actually, if we come on to, we'll say something later about verse 3, because I think that's a really key verse for us as to what we do with the book of Revelation. And then verse 4, he says, John to the 7 churches that are in Asia. So we've got churches established in Asia, which is present day Turkey. So it's really putting us right at the end of the apostolic era, if you like, the time of the apostles. It's quite possible that not many of the apostles were still alive at this point.
Okay.
And so we're sort of at this changeover point, this transition point from the time of the apostles, those that were with Jesus during his life and his death and resurrection, saw all of that, to kind of moving on to the next generation that are going to take these churches into the future.
Okay. So it does feel like we're at the end, doesn't it? Or the conclusion of the time period that covers.
Or certainly in a transition into something else.
Yeah.
And a preparation for that something else, whatever it may be.
Yeah. So Asia, you talked about Asia, these 7 churches, of course. Yeah. Asia today refers to that huge continent, but it's a Roman province back in that time. Is that right?
Asia Minor. Yeah, Asia. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of, so it's pretty much Turkey, isn't it? So these 7 churches are, they come up later, don't they, in the next couple, 2 or 3 chapters, and they would have been the ones who would have heard it read aloud. That's in those first 3 verses. It says that, doesn't it? And we've already made reference to that about listening. Those who have ears, they should hear. So real people were listening to this for the first time in 7 different places. So
so there's cool. Verse 3 was, blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and then John to the 7 churches that are in Asia.
Good. Okay. So it feels like bearing that in mind all the way through reading it is going to be helpful and to understand this.
Think about what they would have heard, what triggers in their thinking would be made by what they heard. Okay. So just skipping forward to the next paragraph, which sort of begins with verse 9, and it says, I, John, your brother and partner in the tribulation and the kingdom and the patient endurance that are in Jesus, was on the island called Patmos on account of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. So for some reason, John, the writer of this, was exiled to this island of Patmos in the Aegean Sea. So there's, there are consequences for witnessing to Jesus, and that again sort of fits quite well with the sort of end of the 1st century Roman Empire period, with the imperial cult in full swing.
So consequences for publicly declaring that you're a Jesus follower, effectively. Is that what you, So witnessing to Jesus, meaning, I'm a Christian, basically. So and that didn't go down well.
And he's a brother and a partner in the tribulation and the patient endurance. So they're waiting. Okay. These believing communities are waiting for something. Other parts of the New Testament talk about the return of Jesus, the reappearance of Jesus. But they're waiting, and the apostles are dying out, and they're still waiting.
And
the churches are still there, and so we're building, perhaps we thought these communities were just going to be there for a little while and then Jesus would reappear.
Yeah.
But he's still not here. And so what's this church for then?
Yeah.
What's its role in the world? What is church building for in a world that's still waiting for
good.
Jesus?
Okay, yeah. So that really paints the picture of what's happening to these communities and indeed John himself. So do we know anything more about John? Who's John, the author?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? It just says his servant John. So whoever this is written to, he says, I, John, to the 7 churches.
They would have known him.
I, John, your brother. They knew who he was. There's no need for any further explanation.
Okay.
So that's probably about all we can say with absolute certainty about about John. That he was known to the churches in Ephesus, in Asia, rather, in the towards the end of the first century. It doesn't. I don't think it really matters. There are a few debates about which John. There's a John the Elder that Papias mentions. I'm not sure it matters that much.
Okay.
Which one we land on.
But normally tradition is that it's the author of the 4th Gospel as well.
It's the Apostle John. And that is, there's a reasonable, not unanimous, because there never is, but there's a reasonable consensus amongst commentaries and scholars that there's no reason to doubt that it wouldn't be that Apostle John.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So take that as it may. Whoever he is, he's exiled. He's exiled because he's a Christian, and he's publicly declared that.
Yeah.
And and himself and everyone else are expecting something. They're waiting for Jesus, and they're in this period of pretty bad tribulation, I suppose, persecution, and okay, good. So, what about when I feel so? We're sort of talking the latter half of the 1st century, aren't we? You've already sort of alluded to that. Whereabouts can we?
We've pretty much pinpointed it already. There's I guess there's 2 views, because there's a key event that happens around AD 70. So 70 years after more or less the birth of Jesus, which is the siege of Jerusalem and the burning of the temple by the Roman armies, which essentially overturned the Jewish religious system at the time. So the views about the date of the Book of Revelation tend to put it either before that, and therefore the book is about that event, kind of
I see.
looking to that event, or it's after that event and is about things beyond the 1st century. So it's a pretty clear majority that put it in the time of the Emperor Domitian.
Okay.
Which is towards the end of the 1st century, but 81 to 96 AD, the Emperor Domitian was in charge, and so I see no reason why we don't go with that. It does fit really well with some of the content of the book, as we'll see when we start to get into the imperial cult. So in Ephesus, for example, there was this huge statue of Domitian that was on a raised bit of ground that overlooked all of the other public spaces, the agora and the other public spaces of the city. This, I don't know, 10-meter high statue of the Emperor Domitian. And he thought it'd be great if everyone worshipped him, which is a bit of a problem for Christians.
Yeah, so you can see why witnessing to Jesus, you might end up in exile or even worse, lose your life, which was happening. Yeah, okay. Right, okay, so we've got a bit of feel for the time period. Let's think about what type of book we're dealing with. So we've done T for time. Is that right?
Yeah.
T for time. Is that right? That we need to do next?
Yeah, I think so.
I can't remember
the type of writing.
What's the third one?
The target audience, which I think we've kind of done as well. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So we've done a bit of that. Yeah, good. Yeah. But when I only have one tea, and it's a cup of tea. I can't think of 3 others. Yeah.
And being English, that's very important.
Exactly. Okay. Right. Type of writing then. Genre. Bit of jargon.
Yeah. So, and there's quite a few options here, I think. There's a few candidates. So in the Greek, the word that is translated Revelation is apokalypsos. So, which is probably a terrible pronunciation. Apologies to Greek scholars who may be listening. So that's the opening word, the revelation of Jesus Christ. But there is this genre of literature that scholars have labelled as apocalyptic literature.
Yeah, which is definitely a piece of jargon. So
which we'll explain what that is. But it starts like a letter as well.
Yeah.
Doesn't it? John, to the 7 churches that are in Asia, grace to you and peace from him. And that, that's just look back at the letters of Paul and that's how they start.
Yeah.
I, Paul, and blah, 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 grace and peace to you. And so it sounds like a letter.
That. Does it end like a letter as well? I'm just flicking.
Well,
forward.
it's.
Oh, it does.
Sort of, yes.
The grace of the Lord Jesus be with you all. Amen.
Yeah. And actually, in verse 9, it says, I, John, your brother and partner. We read that. And then right at the end, it sort of closes off with the epilogue in chapter 22, verse 8. I, John, am the one who heard and saw these things. So it's framed as a letter. And actually, I think it's quite interesting that the letter features are right at the beginning there and right at the end of chapter 22. So the whole thing is a letter. We've obviously got within the letter references to letters to individual churches in chapters 2 and 3. Yeah. But I think we can conclude that the whole thing is a letter as well.
So those individual messages to the churches are kind of paragraphs within a letter.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's like, right, this one's for Ephesus. There's 8 paragraphs.
There's a bit here for you.
Yeah. All right.
So we've got a letter. We've got features of a letter. And then in verse 3, which we've read twice already, said it was a key verse. So blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy.
Okay.
So it calls itself a prophecy. And we're very familiar with what, we've got prophecies, books of prophecy, prophetic writings in the Old Testament. That's a familiar genre. And actually it starts, so you notice those first 3 verses talk about John in the third person. So the revelation of Jesus Christ, he made it known by sending his angel to his servant John.
Yeah.
And then you get verse 4, now it's the voice of John to the 7 churches. And that's a familiar formula, if you like, from the Old Testament prophets.
Yeah.
It'll often be a word at the beginning, a little prologue that is, the words of Isaiah, the son of Amos, during the days of these kings, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And then and the word of the Lord came to me and said,
blah, blah, blah.
And it's the voice of the prophet. So this is John very much putting himself into the line of the prophets and saying, this is a prophecy. I'm building on the prophets of old, prophets of Israel. And there's a huge number of references back to those prophets in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah, so it feels like understanding how to read a prophecy is going to feature quite heavily.
Yes.
Which we need to think through.
Yeah. So we've. But let's go back to this apocalyptic literature thing that we mentioned. So it's a genre that scholars have put a label on this type of literature that sort of developed between the Old Testament and the New Testament eras. So from about 400 BC to the time of Christ. And there are certain key features of this type of literature that kind of marks it out as apocalyptic literature. And it's essentially, it's often very symbolic, using lots of animals to represent things and lots of visions of strange and weird and wonderful things happening, but they're representative. It's symbolic language. But the storyline, if you like, of apocalyptic literature is often the present day is evil, it's corrupt, the people of God are corrupt, and there's a calamity that is about to occur.
Okay.
And at that point, God is going to break into the world and remove the corruption and save the remnant that have kept themselves pure, and they will take things forward from there. And that's the style of apocalyptic and the features of apocalyptic literature. They're often pseudonymous. How do you say that? Pseudonymous.
Written in a false name.
Written under another name, and it's usually quite clear that it's written under a false name because it's a character from the Old Testament.
The Book of Enoch would be one of
the Book of Enoch is an example, or the Testament of Moses, or something like that. And when we look at Revelation, we don't really find those characteristics fitting very well. First of all, there's no reason to think that the writer is pretending to be John. John, there's just no reason to think that. So it's not written in a false name. And also from these opening verses, so let's just have a look at verse 4 and 5. So John, to the 7 churches that are in Asia, grace to you and peace from him who is and who was and who is to come, which is an Old Testament reference, and from the 7 spirits, which is another Old Testament reference, who are before his throne, and from Jesus, the faithful witness, the firstborn of the dead, and the rulers of the kings on earth, to him who loves us and has freed us from our sins by his blood, and made us a kingdom, priests to his God and Father. So the context of this is God has already broken into the world and done something, and it's Jesus. It's the Messiah. It's the Son of God.
Okay.
And the initiation of the kingdom has already happened. So whereas this apocalyptic literature is all that's still God hasn't yet broken in to the world. So that apocalyptic literature doesn't quite fit what Revelation is. So where does that leave us?
So it doesn't quite fit. Well, it has some similarities in the parts of the book, doesn't it? I think that's what is fair, isn't it? So you get symbols, or I think you get imagery that is quite bizarre, quite vibrant, and you've got to try and work it out. It does have
similarities with some of that apocalyptic literature. So I would sort of, in answer to the question, what genre is it? Well, I'd kind of merge all those three options into one and say it's a letter which conveys a prophetic message. Yeah. And by prophetic, if you've listened to some of our previous podcasts, you'll know that's not just about prediction. That's about seeing something, hearing something that makes you sit up and think about the way you view the world and the way you act in it.
Yeah, a word from God to see God's perspective on what's happening. Yeah.
It's a much better explanation. And so it's a letter containing a prophetic message of that nature, but using symbolic and apocalyptic style language and imagery
in parts of the letter. Yeah. Okay.
Often drawn from the Old Testament.
Yeah. All right. So it's a bit of everything. So you got three T's within one of the T's. Well, three types. Three types within the one.
Three types of yeah. But it's helpful to just appreciate the fact that it's a letter wrapped around all of this. It's a letter.
Yeah.
The fact that it's a letter means it's written to an audience.
Yeah.
So we can think of it as a communication to 7 churches in Asia and beyond, presumably. What did they hear? What entered their thoughts and their minds and their emotions as they heard this?
Yeah. As the saying goes, the Bible wasn't written to us, but it was written for us. But so here, the Book of Revelation is a letter that clearly isn't written to you and me, to us directly. It's written to these 7 churches. That's what it says. Yeah. So first stop should be thinking about what they might have thought and heard and understood, and then from that, there's no doubt a prophetic message for us as well. So
just that verse 3 again.
Okay.
Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written in it. So that sort of emphasizes that by prophecy, this isn't just about predicting a series of events that you can tick off when you look through your history book. It's something. It's going to convey something, and hopefully we'll get to this. It's going to convey something that makes you, when you put the book down and stop hearing it, you turn around and look at the world and you look at it differently.
Yeah.
And you think about your place in the world differently.
Yeah. Because it's God's prophetic word that has revealed this to you. Good. Okay. So it feels like we've got a way of tackling this, which is thinking of these 3 T's, thinking of the time, the target, and the type, which I think that forces us to approach it in a certain way. But is that how people generally approach it, or there's other things to think about, aren't there? What else? What other options are on the table, and how do we deal with it?
And I think it's important to, again, it's partly an expectation management thing. We're not going to put out an explanation or a way of reading this that is going to destroy all other previous interpretations. But it's worth knowing and just explaining a bit about the way that we'll go through this, where that sits in the spectrum of interpretations, if you like, that do exist.
Yeah, because what you're saying, presumably you've just not dreamt this yourself, and that there's a
correct.
Good. Okay. So there's a wide range of different approaches to this book. There always has been, haven't there, effectively? Well, as from as far back as we can sort of go, and what we'll be sort of presenting is what you're presenting is a particular way of looking at it, but there are different ways as well, which I guess we might be commenting on a little bit and evaluating to some extent, but maybe not fully.
Yeah, I mean, there are a huge range of interpretations, and so you mentioned 666 at the beginning.
Yep.
That's been interpreted as a coded reference to Nero Caesar, right through to it's referring to barcodes. When you buy your spaghetti and your cornflakes and you wave them in front of the self-scanning thing at the supermarket, the barcode has got 3 lines on it, which are spacers. They're a little bit fatter, but they're the same as a 6. So every time you scan, you buy something, 666. So that's one.
I didn't know that's why the barcode. There's actually a bit more to it than I thought.
Yeah. So it's more substantial than you perhaps thought. Yeah. And there's locusts that appear with faces of men, and they're right from the Muslim armies of bearded men right through to attack helicopters with their whirring blades. There's just, I just mention those not to say they're ridiculous or they're wrong or they're right, but just there's a huge range of things that people have thought of and connected with the different images and symbols. There are some sort of, we can try and categorize some of these ways of interpreting it though. And we are going to get into some jargon.
Okay, here we go.
I'm afraid. So I'd say there's probably two families of interpretations, I guess. One is what you might call predictive. So this very much takes the approach of decoding the symbols.
Yeah.
And attributing, that symbol, that image represents this and that moment in history, and the next one represents this and that moment in history. And it's treating the book as predictive in that sense. And then there's another family which doesn't think about those symbols as specific predictions, but as analogous to types of things. Okay. I mean, there's just to throw the reference out there because it is useful. In Michael Gorman's book, Reading Revelation Responsibly, he has a section on this and describes these different approaches, and it's very helpful.
Yep, good.
And just to take an example, there's the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. You've probably heard of that.
Sure.
The first 4 seals: a white horse, a red horse, a black horse, and then a pale horse. And they've got different features. So the earliest commentary that we've got on Revelation is from a guy called Victorinus in about 300 AD, and he interprets those very generally as, well, one's representing invasion, one's representing civil conflict, one's representing famine, and the other's representing death, just very generally.
Okay.
And that's the sort of analogous approach. They're not tying them to specific events, but just recognizing what they might represent in any time period.
Yeah.
And then just 300 or 400 years later, the next sort of commentary is Andreas of Caesarea. And he's looking back over history and he's saying, well, actually, I can see a period in which there was war. I can see a period in which there was civil unrest. I can see a period in which there was famine, and then a period in which there was disease and death and pestilence.
So he's put some dates against
So he's
them.
starting to put them, that's switching it into a more predictive.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see why, because he's coming much further after, a few hundred years later, and can look back over history. So anyway, so there's that predictive family, but within that family, you've got this sort of historicist or continuous historic approach. And originally, those two families of interpretation kind of coexisted alongside each other quite happily, really until you get to the Reformation.
Okay.
So 1500 onwards, really. And then the historicist interpretations kind of explode in the Protestant Reformation because there's an interpretation that points out an interpretation that the beast, the mark of the beast, the 666, is pointing to the Pope, this corrupt system, Babylon the Great, is pointing to the Pope, and you can see why that emerges politically
at that moment in history
from the Reformation period. And then you get the Catholic Counter-Reformation, and so they produce two alternative but still predictive interpretations, and one says, oh, well, actually this is all referring to the past, to the AD 70 and the siege of Jerusalem. That's the preterist approach. And then the third alternative is it's futurist. It's all a future period of tribulation that is coming at around the time, the end of the age, the time of the return of Jesus or whatever.
So you can't look back at history.
So it's not pointing at Rome or anything specific. It's all done, or it's all still in the future. And actually, that all still in the future futurist view has seen a bit of a modern revival. You might have heard of the Left Behind series by Al Lindsay. So
I get the feeling that that's probably, I don't really know if it is, but generally the view held by many sort of Christian, maybe evangelical Christian communities.
Yeah, possibly.
Generally the one that
it's a future tribulation.
Okay. Yeah, so there's some the jargon there is the futurist and preterist, isn't it? That's what. And then I suppose you've
and historicist, which is
the continuous. But all of that is all sort of sitting within the predictive element. But then alongside that, or as an alternative, you've got the more of the analogy, taking it as an analogy, I suppose. So is that where you're taking us? Or?
I don't know. Which one do you fancy? Really? It's I mean, it's, as we may have hinted already, if we're going to approach it as treating it as something directed at a target audience, those 7 churches in Asia and at that time, that's we're likely to end up with more of the analogous type of interpretation and view of it, simply because whatever they understood when they heard this, it wasn't connected with the history of the next 2,000 years. Because they had no idea, had no view of that.
And they were still expected to keep it. That was that. Is it verse 3? I don't know how many times.
It's verse 3 again.
So they were going to hear it and keep it. Whatever. They've got to. So it's got to mean something substantial to their daily lives there and then. Which then means, I think, as you're sort of saying, it can quite easily become something that means something to us for our daily lives. That's what I think. Hopefully, we're going to get to.
So I think, what we'll try and do is hear it through the ears of that first century audience. Try and get to what they would have heard and understood and felt about it. And actually, I think as we do that, I think there are some really powerful messages that come through, which actually do help you to do what verse 3 says, to not just hear it, but to keep it. There are calls to do something, to do some things as well. So hopefully we'll get that framework and then we'll build on it.
Yeah, but and the call to action is very much the prophetic purpose anyway, isn't it? Thinking back to all the Old Testament prophets, they were prophesying to get people to do something, or to live a certain way, or stop behaviour in one way or another. Okay, good. So what are we going to do next then?
So with that introduction, I think the next one that we'll do on this, I really want to focus on how the 22 chapters are structured. Because I think this, when I started the preparation and study for this, that's the thing that really makes it fit together and make sense. It really was. I mean, I know I said there wouldn't be a key that unlocks it, but
you're going to give one anyway. That's good.
There's for me, that's what did turn the light bulb on. Is right, now I understand why this is the way it is, and paying attention to the structure, so the flow of the book
is the key. So it's not a key that I happen to know something that happened in a particular point in time that unlocks this symbol. So it's like any part of the Bible, isn't it? Sit down and carefully read it and sort of pick up on the flow of the Bible, of the passage.
And it's there are certain key phrases that keep popping up, and there's actually one that in verse 10 of chapter 1. So it says, "I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me the voice like a trumpet." And so it all starts. And but I was in the Spirit, that's a phrase that appears 3 or 4 times and it's sort of a marker of the beginning of a section. And if you think of when you're hearing it, those are the kind of things that you pick up. Just repeated phrases that you think, okay, I'm at the beginning of a new train of thought now. Just hearing it, you don't get the full design and complexity of this book, but you do pick up the framework. I think.
And I suppose they would have read it aloud more than once, wouldn't they?
It's certainly a book that you think, I didn't quite get that. I think I'll go back to it and hear it again.
Can I think, because we've not I mean, it's been really helpful, this introductory sort of setting what we're trying to do. We've not managed to sort of dive into much of the text, but I think it'd be really good. I'd just read a few verses there from that verse 10, just to get a feel for what type of book we're dealing with. I'll carry on reading. I'll just read and get a feel for it. Okay, yeah. So, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet saying, "Write what you see in a book, and send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus, to Smyrna, to Pergamon, and to Thyatira, and to Sardis, and to Philadelphia, and to Laodicea." Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me, and on turning I saw 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of the lampstands one like a son of man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace. And his voice was like the roar of many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars. From his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword, and his face was like the sun shining in full strength. That's pretty cool, isn't it?
Oh, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
So immediately you've got this description of this weird figure. He's got white hair like snow, but his eyes are flames of fire, and it's just bizarre.
Yeah.
But it's an image that comes straight out of Daniel.
Yeah.
Daniel chapter 10.
Yeah,
so it immediately is picking up on, that's from an Old Testament prophet.
Yeah.
And there's so much of that.
Yeah.
And there's
Yeah, and I can hear, just in that little section as well, I can hear parts, later chapters of Revelation coming through, like the sharp 2-edged sword from the mouth of this person. That's an image that crops up later. So I suppose, like you were saying, things that people would have heard and twigged and realised that, this is all coming together. I'm catching on with what this is about. So
and there's another little feature in that which comes up, and I think it's a really key theme of the book, which is, so I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet. So this happens several times where John hears something or hears a description of something but doesn't see it, and then verse 12, I turned and he sees it, but what he sees is something unexpected.
I see, yeah.
Compared with what he's heard. So you get this several times that I heard this or heard something described, and then what he actually sees defies expectation.
Great, okay.
And that makes you think,
why is that? Why is that? Yeah. I think we're going to have to wait till a future episode. Yeah, I think that's enough to whet everyone's appetites. So thank you, Paul. Lots more to look forward to. So thank you, everyone.
That's going to be good fun.
For listening. Yeah, no, it is. I'm looking forward to it. I think it'd be great. I suppose now is the time to get in touch and ask us if you've got any specific questions about Revelation. I mean, we like to hear from you. Anyway, thank you very much to those who do get in touch. It's really great to hear from you. You can find us on Facebook, just search for Bible Feed, or you can go to biblefeed.org and you can send us a message there. And all of our material and everything is online there on our website. So thank you very much. Thanks again, Paul, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Bible Feed podcast. Thanks for joining us. We're always keen to hear what you think, hear your questions, or subjects you'd like us to discuss. Get in touch with us on our Facebook page or send a message from our webpage at biblefeed.org and be part of the journey.